Now to install a gearbox on an engine, we're just going to show a sample here. For instance, this is a 130 engine, so we have already installed the flywheel that goes on first, and then the drive coupling second, and we use these screws that come with it, and they get a drop of engine oil on them, and then just tighten them up with an impact driver. Or if you want to lock the flywheel, tie it to something with safety wire, then you can tighten them to 70 foot-pounds. You would need a 12.17 millimeter socket. In some cases you have to put it in the lathe and make it a little bit thinner in the front for it to engage properly. And even the front of the socket sometimes has a lead in, and these bolts are very shallow, so in order to engage properly onto the bolts, you even take a little bit off the front of the socket to remove that lead in. Then you want to take a centering bushing, and you always want to replace the centering bushing no matter if the engine has run for 3 seconds or 500 hours, because it's just an alignment tool. When you install the gearbox, it aligns perfectly here. That's also why it needs to be driven all the way into the engine so it's nice and stable. Okay, so here is a centering bushing for the 130 engine. This one has a little step in the front that goes in there first, and then use a plastic or wood hammer and drive it all the way into the engine until it stops. Make sure you hit it fairly hard, because you don't want it to be loose in there, because then it will not center the gearbox. If you want, you can measure and put a mark on it, how deep the, so you have an idea how far in it's supposed to go. Use a silver pen or something like that. Alright, so now we're ready for the installation of the gearbox. And the first thing we're going to do is put the rubber drive lugs or torsion damper lugs onto the flywheel. Now the engine, as we're facing it, rotates counterclockwise, so it rotates this way. We want the drive lugs to pull on the gearbox, which means if we attach here, the link has to be over this way, so when this rotates, it'll pull the other end of the link with it. The links themselves, as you can see, are directional. If you look very closely, you'll see a little scallop on one side and a curve, a little bit of a curve on the other side, a male curve, and a female on this side. The female curve goes on the inside, as though when you put 3 of these together, there'll be a circular hole in the middle. So we're going to put that on like that. You can put a little bit of silicone grease on these pins, just a small amount, so it doesn't get on anything else. Alright, so it goes like this. The part that's not engaged is going to be over to the right if we started with this one. So now when the engine turns this way, if I attach the gearbox here, it will get pulled that direction, and the gearbox would be pulled. You never want it to be like this and then the engine turns this way and it's trying to push against my hand or push the gearbox around. That would not last very long. Alright, so the curve of this out, and it's going to pull like that. Why am I explaining this so much? Well, you'll be surprised how many people get this wrong. They don't see the seriousness about the centering bushing. They think, well, engine only ran an hour. Well, what happens in an hour is that this is only an alignment tool. It will not last when the engine is turning. So, and then when you install it, you have 30,000 slop in here. The whole gearbox gets off center, and then the rubber donuts are not running centered. They build up heat, and there's a failure mode there. So it needs to be centered. So there, and then we grab the second one, curve on the outside, scallop on the inside, goes on here, and then third one. So there's 3 total. curve on the outside. It rotates this way, so I want this end on here. Now, you can take a piece of tape or something and just kind of tape these into place, like so that they are about like this. And then that might help instead of them falling down when we start doing the gearbox. So let's just put something on there to hold them somewhat close to where they're going to be when we push the gearbox on there to make it easier to align things. Now, as you start, you don't have to have the gearbox. I mean, it rotates all the way around. So it doesn't have to be like straight up and down with the engine, as long as you can rotate it into place afterwards. So I like to just do it kind of upside down. So I just held it, and I put the centering bushing in, and then I just move these on a little bit, and I just do that all the way around, so I get like kind of half and half, and then I can wiggle the gearbox in after that. Alright, so I've got it all the way in. This is on here, on all three of them. And I'm just going to swing this up until this hole lines up there, this one lines there, and these two on the 130 line up with the starter. And then we're going to put some bolts in and spacers. Alright, so we got one bolt and a spacer put in there. I would say you can use the bolts twice and then get a new set of bolts if you're have a reason to have the gearbox off more than that. We have a washer on this side against the aluminum. On the back side we used to have self-locking nuts. We have now switched to just flange nuts like these, because they won't back off at 70 foot-pounds of torque. And it's just easier to install that way, and it comes with a built-in washer. So we're going to put all four of them in like that. One on the 130, one of these has to have a little flat spot on the other side to clear the starter. Other than that, they're all the same. 1, 2, and then over here, 3 and 4. And the one with a flat spot would be this bottom one here. If you get a new starter at an automotive store, if you ever needed one, you have to drill the starter up to 1/2 inch because the bolts are 1/2 inch. So let's get the bolts put in there. One detail with this, after you have these all tightened up, right now they're just finger tight, but when they're all the way in, what you want is just a little bit of side to side play on the rubber donuts. The turbo engine has a little bit more, and that's okay too. But you don't want them to not move at all. Or if they don't move at all, at least look from the side, and they should be perfectly straight. They should never be like S-turned or bent. And if they are, you can put a 1/2 inch washer in between here and the spacer on all of these. That's not an issue with newer engines, but in the past, if that was something that was overlooked, if this gets too tight, then that's exactly what you do. You add an equal washer to all mounting locations. Now, as far as torquing the bolts, these through bolts, 1/2 inch all the way through with a steel nut on the back, torque those up equally all the way around to 70 foot-pounds. If one of them or two of them or whatever on some drives, of course we do a lot of engines, look like this, and it's a metric 12 millimeter bolt, then if it threads into the engine, if this is not a through hole and there are threads in here, then you tighten it to 50 foot-pounds. So 70 foot-pounds with the nut and 50 without. Alright, so we have it on the engine, it's all tight. Now we're going to put 10 ounces is the measurement. We've been at 8, we've been at 12. 10 has been determined to be the best. Mobile 75W90 gear oil in here. That'll bring it up usually above the sight glass. The sight glass is more to see if there is oil and less for a level. The level is whatever you put in. Your gearbox should have an X down here with an X box. If it doesn't have that, If it has 48 states, that's acceptable. Can be updated to an X if you have any trouble at all. Anything that doesn't have a stamp from 2024 on is now a service bulletin and must be updated to the X stamp with the roller bearings inside. So no more of the earlier gearboxes should be flying. As far as venting the gearbox, some of them have the vent up on top here. If it's a VIP gearbox where a shaft running through here, then the vent is a little bit further down in the middle on the back side of this middle gear. In any case, a hose runs from there to the vent canister on the firewall, 3/16. If your engine uses on the cooling, that's fine. This spongy kind of neoprene hose, that's fine. Cooling won't affect that. It will affect gear oil, so that's not good for that. Also, there's some other hose that was used for a short time, kind of a thin hose, and it was supposed to be really good for oil, but it wasn't. It cracks real easy. And then the hose that should be used is 3/16 fuel injection hose that Viking has, or you can get on an auto parts store or Amazon. So 3/16 fuel injection hose, and that runs up to your overflow tank. On the overflow tank, make sure you blow through it. Make sure it actually is vented. If you don't have a lot of venting, take the cap off and just put a 1/16 inch hole in the cap of the overflow tank to be sure. Now you can get this on with a spring clamp. Sometimes a little bit hard, but if you have a pair of these 90-degree bent pliers, that seems to work just fine. And then that can also be used then to go behind there and get the hose on as well. This is where your gearbox temp probe goes, either this one or this one, it doesn't matter which one. And the other one you can just use for, it's really not used for anything. You can choose if you want to use this one or this one. Sometimes when I fill the gearbox, I'll take the one that's not in use out. That'll just let air out here when you fill it over there. Less chance of spilling. The bottom one has a magnet. So your process during the first 10 hours is to keep the gearbox as clean as possible when it's wearing in. So pull that out every hour for the first 10 hours, drain the oil, and clean the magnet. And then that'll get any of the initial wear and tear in the gearbox out of there, and there's less strain or metal going through the bearings for the future of the gearbox. So that's important. After that, it's 25-hour gearbox changes with 10 ounces. As far as the earlier 110 engine with its gearbox, there's one kind. Be sure to look at the Viking Aircraft Engines website and then study the latest video on updates to that. One of them is, of course, is to go to 1/2-inch bolts and a whole lot of details. So refer to the website for the 110 gearbox.